right. Washington and Boston. Living in Washington. Christina's going to law school in Boston.
Good, Lillian.
So, we get to go places like Claire's in Baltimore. She got a fellowship at Johns Hopkins.
They like to be.
So we got them. We got the East Coast blanket.
Yeah.
It's unusual. Yeah.
Right on the Acela line.
Yep.
Good point. She's like,
See what this thing says.
I don't know. Here we go. And Heidi.
How are you?
Running fast and now I'm here. Which is good.
Second floor. I rode up the elevator with, what's her name?
Second floor folks for the plastic bags.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wrote up the
Who's the chair? I forgot her name. Mental block.
You know,
the
Debbie's
young
wonderful.
woman.
Not Eloise.
Yeah, I rode up the elevator with her, so she's.
Oh, how are you, Eric? I don't. I talked to him about an hour ago on the phone.
I was just messaging with him, and he seemed he was here.
Studies showed that the Norwalk carver went from 11 tight.
If all else fails, I can at least begin the meeting and turn control back over to him. We have everybody else except Ms. Keys here. Ms. Keys will not be with us tonight.
Employees are prohibited from engaging in political activity since.
Okay, if you want to start, that would be great.
It doesn't seem to be a restriction after school.
After the
I don't think I
personnel items,
Yes.
I'd like to introduce Brandon Myers to introduce our
Yes.
new STEM director.
Absolutely.
1311.1. If anybody.
Okay, good.
Policy 1311.1. As long as it's after school hours, it's not restricted.
I'll say, like I pulled it out of the head.
Where's our
Right.
agenda?
If I recall correctly, it's 13 and 11.
I don't actually have
Brian, do you have your agenda, or is that an extra one?
one. I don't have one printed out.
This might be yours.
Remember,
Yeah. Chairs seem a little off. Here's Mike.
Find your address?
why are you?
I think so.
Why are you?
There you go.
It's not I body. It's hard.
He's here.
Look at Bob's.
Mr. Barbas?
Yes, sir. He could have.
They have to approve it, but
You could have.
Hello, Brian.
Mike?
Mike, after the personnel items are approved, I'd like to ask Brandon Myers to introduce what's our new staff.
Any one of these. There we go. We just know that. Any one of these people. But I use it more often.
Good evening. This is our business meeting on October 16th, and I'm calling the meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first order of business will be Spotlight, and I will give that to Mr. Meek to proceed with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In tonight's Spotlight, we have the Merrimack educators who represented the Norwalk Public Schools at the National Conference. This summer, grade 3 and 4 educators from Merrimack Elementary School presented as the nation's first Quad D lab school at the 26th Annual Model Schools Conference in Orlando, known as the Grammys of Education. Each year, over 5,000 educators attend the national conference looking for new ideas, new tools, and an opportunity to hear transformation stories directly from peers. Today, the Board of Education is pleased to honor this devoted group of teachers. Together, they work diligently to share how their experiences embracing the philosophy of rigor, relevance, and relationships led to positive transformational change for Merrimack students. The Quad D team highlighted how traditional teaching methods could be elevated to help students take ownership and be accountable for their thinking and working. During the 17-18 school year, Merrimack Elementary School partnered with the International Center for Leadership and Education to innovate new curriculum and instructional practices, focusing on an increase in rigor and relevance in their classrooms to increase student achievement for all learners. Following the rigor relevance framework, Quad D learning provides students with opportunities to compose, create, design, invent, research, and justify, whether engaging in math curriculum topics such as division or interactive learning about the history of Thomas Jefferson. We thank the educators and administrators who worked hard to establish the Quad D Lab School. We are proud to have had MPS educational leaders represent the district on this important stage. The Board of Education would like to recognize Scott Santaniello, Allison Americh, Susan Corridon, Sherry Duque, Yvonne Roberson, and Kathleen Durkin for their continuous dedication and enthusiasm. The board also wants to recognize Narragansett CISD Shannon Roman and Principal Jane Wilkins for their leadership and support. Thank you very much. And we do have some certificates here. I'll call you up, Scott Santaniello.
I think Mary wants to shake your hand.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Well done.
Congratulations, Scott.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Allison Imerich.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How's your daughter doing?
Good job, Allison.
Thanks.
Congratulations, Allison.
Congratulations, great job.
Great, very nice, thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Suzanne Corridon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Sherry Duque.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice work.
Lavone Roberson.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Kathleen Durkin. Shannon Roman.
There you go.
Good job, Shannon. I'm going to give you the rest of them.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you so much.
Very nice, thank you.
And last but not least, Jane Wilkins.
We're wearing our shirts that we presented. This was our uniform.
Thanks.
Well done, Jane.
Why we're a little casual.
Not everybody can pull off yellow, but you all do.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Okay, one last round of applause for Narragansett Elementary. And that concludes our spotlight, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will have public comments. I don't know if anyone has signed up at this point.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
They all crossed their names out, they must have been for bags.
Oh, they were there for the
So
next
zero.
thing.
Yeah, the bags.
Okay.
Thus ends our public comments.
I assume there are no public comments, so we will now move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a note on the Narragansett Quad D Lab School. The board will recall discussing this at your summer retreat. And we are pursuing this as a laboratory school as opposed to a magnet school, which was the essence of the discussion. That will involve the training of I believe, grade 2 and 5 teachers this year, followed by grade 1 the following year. And we have a meeting coming up with Javier Padilla, who will be also working with the school to provide training opportunities for teachers, particularly new teachers, and we anticipate a series of fellowships for experienced teachers, or placements, residencies for new teachers. So very excited about this work. We're very grateful to the teachers and leaders at Narragansett for stepping up and doing such a good job in this area, and really garnering so much attention on their work, which is created a source of pride for our city and our schools. Thank you all. Wanted to highlight tonight our first annual report to the community. The board is aware of this. We have not discussed this publicly at this point, so we have copies of the annual report available for the media and the public this evening. This year, Norwalk Public Schools produced its first ever annual report. The purpose of the 8-page report was to highlight progress that our students and schools have made under the Board of Education's strategic operating plan. The piece was written and designed not just for parents, but especially for those who may not be involved in the day-to-day life of the school district. With just over 11,600 students in a city of 86,000 residents, many residents do not currently have children in school. The Board of Education recognized that these residents may not be fully aware of the advances and progress our schools have made over the past few years, but a strong school system provides an educated workforce and raises property values by attracting home buyers. So everyone who lives here has a vested interest in the Norwalk Public Schools. With that in mind, at its annual retreat over the summer, the board requested that we increase the distribution to include a hard copy mailing to every household in the city. Our first State of the Schools annual report has now been delivered via bulk mail to a total of 35,904 Norwalk households. Bulk mail is delivered over a 3 to 10 day period, which is why different parts of town receive their mailer on different days. It will also be shared directly with realtors, business leaders, and community and foundation partners. It has been very well received. We've heard from a number of people in the community who commented that they were not previously aware of the growth and progress our schools have made, and that they are pleased to hear a positive factual news about the district. This will now become an annual publication to be produced every September by our communications department. The cost to print was 31 cents each, plus 10 cents for the bulk mailing postage. With graphic designs included, the cost per unit was under 50 cents, about 45 cents each. Total cost $16,000 for the entire project and distribution to every mailing address in the city. Since the publication of the report, the State of Schools report has now also received honorable mention, or second place, in the CABE 2018 Communication Awards for schools over 5,000 students. In addition, our district-wide newsletter was the first place CABE Award winner in the category for large school districts, and our MPS Facebook page also took honorable mention, or second place. I want to congratulate Brenda Wilcox-Williams, who is not able to be here tonight, for these achievements in communications and for making Norwalk a model in the state for communications with the community. And certainly our annual report, the State of the Schools report, has contributed greatly toward that goal.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to also support that statement, Dr. Adamowski and Brenda. You know, a couple of years ago, it was a significant complaint about the school system that we were not communicating, and doing through the newspapers is hit or miss. You know, sometimes they pick up a story, and I think, you know, the email newsletters that have been going out are really high quality. This thing is very nice. I got some nice compliments on that from people who received it. So, and for a relatively small amount of money. So, keep up the good work.
Thank you. And then finally, I took the liberty of ordering the new publication on the Freedom of Information Act, which is at your places for your information and bedtime reading.
I was going to say pillow reading.
Our school governance councils have been organized for the 2018-19 school year. The names were sent to you by Dr. Costanzo on Friday, and I think there's also a roster at your place this evening. And I'd like to ask Frank tonight if he would comment on some of the goals for the 2018-19 school year.
Dr. Adamowski, he's not here.
Where is he?
Maybe he's
He's at Norwalk.
the GPA.
Time for this.
Yes, no, I remember him discussing that, which is why we had it on as the second item. Okay.
We can always come back to it.
Okay, we can come
Should
back.
I start asking questions?
That'll take
Would be the
9
tradition.
o'clock.
You just need to wait for the presentation to be completed, Mr. Kimmel.
Okay, so I guess if with your permission, then we'll have to return to that. We do have a brief slide presentation on the SGCs, and as soon as Dr. Costanzo gets here, we'll be able to review it with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I think that's where Brenda is too, by the way.
No, Brenda has another commitment, but hopefully we'll see Frank soon.
Fantastic.
Okay, so then I guess that means we'll go on to actions. We do have a consent calendar, but I think we should just skip that and go to approval of each section individually versus going it on consent. And so I would start with approval of personnel.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and seconded by Mr. Meek. I believe, Javier, I don't know if you wanted to say something or not. I know we did want to introduce, as one of the members of our appointments here, is our new STEM director, Tina Henkel, who I believe is here.
Yes, we'd like to introduce her once you
Have approved her?
approve her
Okay.
hiring.
She is here, and I will say if, I guess, well, Sarah, you're here. I know Heidi's, unfortunately, she's at the GPA meeting. There is a retirement of the social worker at Columbus, Nancy Fasese, who I've gotten to know in a number of different ways, who I thought was really terrific. I was sorry to see her name on that list. But unless there's any discussion, motion for approval we have, so all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce Dr. Myers, who will introduce our new STEM director.
Good evening. I'm honored this evening to be able to the board our new director of STEM. You know, this was an important process for us. We had wonderful participation from administrators and teachers on our committee. We had a very rich array and a very competitive search for this position. Norwalk is an exciting time to be teaching and focusing on learning. So we were very honored today to be able to bring you the proposal to have our new director of STEM, an experienced teacher first, leader second, who has a wealth of knowledge about the integration of math, science, and technology, and a focus on teaching and learning. I'm honored to introduce to you tonight Tina Henkel.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Adamowski, Dr. Myers, and the entire teaching and learning team for their professionalism and their overwhelming support during the interview process and the transition. In this short period of time that I've been collaborating with Norwalk staff, it's very clear to me that this is a results-driven district, and I am excited to be part of the team and to be part of the future successes of the district. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome aboard.
Okay, then that means we're going to go to budget transfers. Could I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Anderson, and seconded by Mr. Meek. Any discussion? All in favor? All in favor, thank you. The third issue is, that's on the agenda is an approval of a trip according to the superintendent, this kind of got on the agenda a little ahead of the gun because he had not yet approved the trip and he had some questions that had not been answered. So I think this will be tabled and will come up on the agenda in November. From this, we'll move on to the approval. This is from Norwalk High School. This is the education specifications for doors and paneling replacement. As the chair of the facilities committee, I can definitely explain this to you in some detail for those who are interested. But basically, there are PCBs in the coating, the sealant of these doors, and the state of Connecticut has a much stricter requirement for when they have to be treated as an environmental hazard versus the national standard and the EPA standard. So if we were just meeting the EPA standard, they could have stayed, but that is not the case. So anyway, the facilities committee reviewed this last Thursday and approved this going forwards. The ed specs is just the requirement. The state is going to actually pay the first $600,000 of this work, and they will then pay anything over $600,000 at our regular reimbursement rate, which is at 32.8%. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. They're really in this document. And for those of you who know and love Norwalk High School, that hideous paneling is going to be gone, and then the doors, some of the doors in the building already were replaced in previous rounds, but now all the doors will replace. So it will contribute to this improvement, this kind of renovation that's taking place. Some of it's been done outside, now it's being done inside. So could I have a motion to approve? Mr. Meek, seconded by Mrs. Lemieux. Any further discussion? No? All in favor? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. From this, we will then recognize, or there's a proposal to recognize the month of October 2018 as ADHD Awareness Month. Can I have a motion? Ms. Byer-Mitchell, seconded by Mr. Kimmel. Any discussion? All in favor? October 2018 is now ADHD Awareness Month. In addition, there's a proposal to recognize this month of October as for Down Syndrome Awareness Month. Could I have a proposal?
So moved.
Mr. Anderson, seconded by Ms. Corbett. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Unanimously approved. I see that Dr. Costanzo's still not here, so we'll move on to information and reports. Tom, could we have the September monthly financial report, please?
Get the meeting done and leave before you run.
Come on, Tom.
Where's everybody?
I'll do my best to keep talking, I guess. So you have the September financial report before you. We are now a quarter of the way through the fiscal year, but only 10% of the way through the school year. Sort of high level, we've spent just under 18% of the budget, which is about where we would expect to be at this time during the year. We are showing, the report is showing that compared to last year, we are up considerably, about a 54% increase compared to the same time last year, but there's some fairly large items that really account for most or all of that variance last year to this year. The biggest reason is that the city, as you know, we pay our health insurance out of our insurance fund, and the city controller periodically, it used to be quarterly, it looks like he has switched this to a 3-time-a-year process, has now hit us for the first third of our contribution to the health insurance fund. Previously, or last year, the first quarter had not actually been booked by the city at this point. So a year ago, we were showing no contribution yet to the insurance fund for health insurance. This year, we're showing an $8 million contribution to date. But again, nothing particularly unusual about that. That's really just a timing issue. So that really accounts for the lion's share of the variance compared to last year. Other highlights, that I'd point out. As you know, we have been monitoring substitutes, and this year we have also, for the first time, have included in the school-based budgets, the student-based budgets, the daily substitute cost. And so you'll see line 118 on page 1 of the detail report. You'll see that we're tracking about 25% below our expenditures at the same time last year on daily substitutes. Obviously, with only 1 month in, it's a little early to read too much into 1 month's history, but I certainly take that as a positive sign on substitutes. Costs are running, we're currently at about 10% of the budget, so that's also a good sign in terms of the schools appear to be managing within the budget that we've given them, given the fact that we're a tenth of the way through the school year. And again, it represents about a 25% reduction compared to the same time last year. Other highlights on the detail report. The overtime is one account that we are watching due to, it's primarily related to facilities and custodial and maintenance services, but that is running higher than last year, so that is one of the accounts that we will be monitoring closely as we go through the year. Some of that does relate to the work that takes place in facilities and in the schools over the course of the summer to get schools ready for the new school year. So you'll also notice that on some of the facilities accounts in terms of contractual services and repair and maintenance services, some of those accounts also are running high compared to where we are at this point during the year. But again, I don't think it indicates any particular problem, but it is an area that we will be continuing to monitor as we go through the year. Also on page 2, I'd mentioned the benefits, but that's where you see the $8 million charge, the contribution to the insurance fund for the fringe benefits. On page 3, the bottom of page 3, you'll notice there is about $600,000 of charges for purchased property services. This represents the payments for the outsourced custodial services as well as outsourced landscaping and hygienics, which does environmental consulting for the city. Those expenses previously were in a 500 series account prior year, so you'll see a reduction in the 500 object code and the increase in the 400 object code, and that was really just a reclassification. A couple other points to make on page 5. Student transportation, you'll see, is reflecting about a total expense of $4.5 million, which is about 55% of the budget, and that is because our contract with First Student does have us prepaying a significant portion of that balance and receiving a substantial credit or offset reduction in our price because of the fact that we prepay. Last year, that prepayment had not yet been reflected on the September report, so that's the other major variance last year to this year is in transportation, which is showing the prepayment this year. In special education, just to talk about also on page 5, object code 563, which is where we pay our out-of-district tuition from. You can see that we've currently spent, as of the end of September, $758,000, which is about 8.5% of the budget. That is down about 35% from the same time last year. I did just check, and we currently have encumbered approximately $7 million of various tuition contracts against these accounts, and there's been, since September, a few $100,000 of additional expenses have been paid. So we are roughly committed for a bit over $8 million of the $9 million that's budgeted in this account. And I bring that up for a couple reasons. One, if you've been on the board for a number of years, you'll remember our first year in, At this point during the year, honestly, we had no idea what our commitments were and what our obligations were in special ed and those tuition contracts. Those contracts, in many cases, in that 3 years ago, weren't actually even written until December or January. Now those contracts are written, they're encumbered, they're on the financial system, and that's not a change from last year or the year before, but I think it's important to highlight it, that it's an important component of what we need to do. Also indicate, I went to a CASBA, which is the Professional Association for School Business Officials, went to a state meeting on Friday, and there is a new state law that has taken effect that requires that essentially all the services that we acquire for special education purposes now have to be contracted for specifically with written contracts, and I think we're in good shape on that. Apparently that has not been the case in a number of districts throughout the state. There was some audit that was done by the State Auditor of Public Accounts who identified that there were not always written contracts in place, so there's now a requirement that written contracts have to be in place in order to file for excess cost reimbursement with the state of Connecticut. So I think we are in good shape in terms of meeting that requirement as well. And I think that is about all the notes I had on here. I'm happy to take any questions. Again, I think bottom line is we're tracking where we would expect to be at this point during the year, and there's really nothing extraordinary to report, but I did want to highlight those few areas that I did mention.
Tom, if anyone wants to ask questions? No? I'm going to ask just about on energy costs. We're seeing some real inflation there. I know back in the day we used to lock in, I don't know, roughly, I think it was maybe half our costs, depended on the year. Are we doing any of that? I haven't heard any discussion, but energy costs haven't been that volatile, but they are now.
Yeah, I have to go back to, give you the exact dates when we're locked in through. My recollection is we're locked in on electricity. We have joined with the city and have locked in jointly at the same time as the city. And I believe we are locked in, I think we're locked in through this year, but I would want to go check. I know we're locked in at least through December, but I think it actually continues for another year beyond that for electricity. For natural gas and heating oil, we're also piggybacking on the city's procurements, and I believe that one of those, I think the oil may run until June, if I remember correctly, and the natural gas, I think, may run until December. But why don't I go back and get those dates, because it's a little fuzzy. I haven't looked at that.
I mean, I just think natural gas won't really matter because prices are pretty low there, and same with power, but oil prices it's starting to get crazy, and it's going to get crazier, and I think now you can't even lock in I don't think you probably wouldn't even want to, actually, but there's going to be some real inflation there, and you might just look at that from a budget perspective as we go into this winter. We might have some surprises there if we aren't locked in, that's all.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. We will take a closer look at that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Anything else? Okay. Well, I guess since our friend isn't here yet, we will move on to committee and representative reports. Would you like to start, Julie?
Sure. Since Heidi is at the focus groups right now, I can give a brief update from policy, although I'm sure once the focus groups are complete, we would have more information there. So on the policy committee, the piece that has really predominated our discussions the last few meetings has really been related to the GPA class rank issue that was uncovered in the spring of last year. And so an update on that policy is that there has been a task force that has been working that's composed of students, teachers, guidance counselors, and some parents as well, with representatives from both Norwalk High School well as Brian McMahon, and they've come up with some recommendations. And so those recommendations are being presented tonight and tomorrow night at each of the high schools, and some focus groups are being held to discuss the recommendations and look at some considerations and implications for those. So with that said, after these focus groups, the next step would be to actually create the draft policy language and then come back to the policy committee to discuss and refine. Once that's approved, then it would come to the full board. So with that said, there was a discussion of having a special meeting potentially some point next week. And so I will follow up with Heidi to figure out if we are still having a special meeting to try to get that moving through the committees and to the full board as quickly as possible. Or one of the proposals is actually a delayed approach and not to change anything for the next year or two. Or at least it would not affect the current juniors and seniors. And so if that's the case, we may not have the need to have a special meeting because there may not be as an urgent change for it. So that'll really depend on the outcome of the focus groups tonight and tomorrow.
And I'll just, before you finish that, I will add, I did hear from Heidi, just so people know what a hot topic this is. There are over 90 people there.
Oh my goodness.
And there's a pretty strong discussion, and we figured that was coming, but I will say, I thought at the last policy committee when this was presented to us, they had obviously done a ton of work. It was really well thought out. I thought they had done a really good job and had what looked like a very strong proposal, but obviously, they'll be subject to some debate.
Right. Well, and some of the things that also came up because of the policy was also the guidance counselors also recognizing that they need to update their school profiles as well to really reflect all of the changes with the new high school program of study that Norwalk has. The existing profiles that are sent to colleges and universities are not necessarily reflective of the depth and rigor that Norwalk high schools now offer to students as well. So that definitely is a positive outcome to realize that early in the year. So hopefully that can get updated as students begin early applications to colleges and universities soon.
Okay, great. Sarah.
So the Special Education Ad Hoc Committee has our meeting on Thursday. And John Flanders, who is the director of the Connecticut Parent Center, which is the Special Education State Parent Advisory Center for the State Department of Education, is going to come and give us a presentation on, they have funding to work with 3 districts, so an urban, a suburban, and a rural. And urban, I don't know if this is in a city school district. Anyways, they're considering Norwalk to develop a model special education advisory committee. And because the ad hoc committee is due to sunset after this year, we're looking at what will be the next steps for special education committee representation as far as the board is concerned in Norwalk. So that's what we're going to talk about on Thursday.
Great, thank you. Mike?
Nothing to report.
Okay, that's always good to hear. Mr. Anderson?
No committee reports.
Okay. I will report on the Facilities Committee, which met last Thursday. As I said, we did discuss Norwalk High School and the ed specs, which were approved tonight. Thank you, everybody. On the board, we also we really had a quick overview. The Ponus Ridge project, the K-8 STEM school that we have underway. The final round of approval is happening at the state as we speak, and we expect to go out to bid by the end of the year, and we will put the project out to bid, and then groundbreaking will take place in first quarter of 2019, which means we should have a September 2020 opening date we feel pretty comfortable with. The new Columbus at Ely project is a little further behind. It had a few more hoops to go through, and those are still underway. We are hoping to get this last round of state approvals, or at least submitted to the state for approval by the end of the year, and that will kind of drive how the rest of the timeline goes. And the tennis courts, the grassroots tennis courts, will be worked on very shortly if they haven't been started already. And those are pretty much, we're starting the planning also for the Jefferson renovation is new, as well as the new IB school, IB at Chestnut, as we've called it a number of times, in South Norwalk. Planning for that also is beginning. So that's everything on planning. Brian.
Okay, I have a little lengthy report tonight, but Finance convened last week on Thursday, October 11th. There were a few items on the agenda you should be aware of. Unfortunately, there was a little snafu with food service reporting on timely invoices. We did get hit with a year-end invoice that was not anticipated, about $134,000. Food service needs some work. It's been continued to be worked on over the last few years, but we're not hitting our goals yet, and we need to dig down and look at that a little closer. The net result of that is that we're still in a surplus situation for the year-end close, which looks like a final right now, but the surplus, as it were, is roughly $282,000. We don't anticipate that, since it came down, that we need the BAT to approve any further rollover. So we're hoping there's no further action on that, and hopefully we'll get those funds rolled over into this year's budget. We also, we had some transfers, which you approved earlier. Thanks for those. We did have an exciting initiative that's been worked on for a couple of years, but starting to come to a head as a purchasing card program, which will give certain building administrators and some staff a purchasing card that will help control local costs and make it easier to report on expenditures and control those. This is coming off of years of a system where we had triplicate purchase orders that might be used to buy pens and pencils, and now there'll be some, what should have been little petty items can be locally controlled out of their school budgets with that, and we'll be able to track those and get better analysis and control on those numbers. I don't have an ETA, but it sounds like most of the administrators are on board with this, so hopefully that happens this year. And then we also did have socialized the 1920 budget calendar. I'm not going to go through all these dates here, and I only have hard copy of it. Just note that the regular Finance Committee meeting in December, which would be December 13th, we are looking to have a joint BOE and City Council Finance meeting to discuss what we have at that point. So the other key dates would be our workshop meeting on January 8th, where we would review the budget ourselves, and then the full board meeting on January 15th, where we would approve the budget. As we get closer, we'll get soft copies of these to the full board. Some of these dates might move, so it's not worth sending out right now, but those are the key dates up front. And then looking forward, we will have a committee meeting on November 8th, where we, hopefully, if we're ready, we will have a discussion about the GPS bus tracker program, which is exciting, a way, it's always been a pain point of knowing where our buses are and communicating that to the parents. So this will hopefully give staff and parents better tools to know where our buses are with our kids.
Well, and that's been an issue recently.
Every year.
Continually.
Every year, so we're finally getting there, but we're looking forward to that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce.
The Curriculum Instruction Committee met earlier this evening, discussed several items. We continue the review implementation of the new Gifted and Talented program. We looked at some of the data that we have. Interestingly, there are more folks in the program. We seem to be, I think staff seems to be happy with the new identification process. The overall demographics are slightly better, but only slightly. We're going to continue to look at that, and we're hopeful that the Encore program and the enriched instruction, the better instruction throughout the school year, will lead to some basic demographic changes, improvements in the participants in the G&T program. We also discussed what's going on this year, where we are with our middle school redesign. A complicated complicated topic. We're right in the middle of it. There are still a number of challenges we have to deal with, from professional development to scheduling, a variety to our new house system, house leaders, things like that. We plan to continue to discuss that. It's, like I said, it's complicated, and hopefully by the end of the year, everybody will have a smooth running. The redesign will be pretty much over, hopefully, and we'll have a smooth running system. We spent a little time discussing Tier 1 literacy instructions, what we expect, what's happening, what needs to improve, how we're going to improve it, and hopefully that's something it's something we end up discussing at almost every meeting, irrespective of what's on the agenda. So it's an interesting discussion, and I think the district is making some progress. In November, we will have the data on, we had expanded, our summer program was expanded last summer, and we'll have the data for our November meeting, and we want to compare it to previous years to see if we've diminished the summer learning gap. We'll be able to compare the September assessments this year from previous years and see where we are. Hopefully, the additional summer instruction cut into that, because as you all know, that is a very, very big deal, and we've got to figure out multiple ways to cut that. The other issue in November will be the Tracy Character Program. We want to discuss different ways that they integrate the curriculum into the implement the program into the curriculum. That it's not just an add-on, it's something that's part and parcel of what they're teaching throughout the day, school day, and throughout the school year. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Barbara?
I'm not a committee chair, but I am the liaison for Norwalk Acts, which is rolling out a survey regarding wellness and social, emotional, mental health. And I can report, I'll roll into individual member reports. Is that okay? That I attended today an all-day conference in Hartford of the Start School Later organization. I'm sure people here know that we have that as part of our strategic operating plan this year to implement a later start time, and that it is recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC that middle schools and high schools not start any earlier than 8:30 a.m. And they have done extensive research showing that it raises GPA, attendance, graduation rates, and lowers tardiness. It increases executive functioning and learning. It lowers car accidents, causing significant savings to the community, and it affects the suicide rates and mental health of the student populations. At the event, Newtown, Wilton, and Greenwich all spoke about the implementation of their efforts in this area, as well as Sharon, Mass was a very compelling case study. One district reported that they had a lot of opposition prior to the implementation, but afterwards they surveyed and 92% of parents were happy. One district reported a 68% decrease in sports injuries because the children were not fatigued and therefore were not getting injured. Sharon, Massachusetts reported amazing results in the area of GPA, attendance, tardiness, every indicator over 5 years. They changed in 2010. And every indicator was significantly more positive. So I'm very excited that we're taking this on and that we've contracted with the bus consultants to help us get this done, because I think it will make a huge impact for our population.
A lot of positive impacts.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess we'll come back your way. Bruce, do you have any board member announcement?
Personal announcement?
Whatever.
Getting over a cold.
Tis the season. Just real quick, as a Cranberry parent, the presence of the security guard seemed to give some structure at Cranberry to the entrance and peace of mind to parents, and so far so good.
That's great, Brian. Good to hear. I will say, as chair of the board, I've been working with the mayor on this task force that is going to look at kind of ways of financially how the school system can work and get funded. We've been at this for a while. It's like I don't know, it's like having greasy hands or something. Names keep on kind of falling through, people not wanting to do it, agreeing to do it, but then changing their minds. So we're still working on it, and we know the board has a big ask to the city for the coming fiscal year, and it's a big demand of taxpayers, and as currently the school system is funded about 90% by city property taxes, it really impacts our residents directly, whether they have kids or not in the school system. So we are committed to working on that. As part of that, I am partaking in a forum tomorrow where it's general discussion on education, but particularly it's about funding of our school system. As we know, ECS funding, the big lawsuit is now behind us and didn't work, and the state doesn't exactly have excess revenues to send our way in the form of incremental ECS dollars, even though we know we're getting shortchanged materially. So I think we need to partake in as many discussions as possible to try to leave no stone unturned and to see what we can come up with and look at the way other states, other towns, other districts have approached this. So it's underway. Stand by. Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a much lighter note, Ms. Lemieux and myself this past weekend and this upcoming weekend were both participants in the Haunting at Mill Hill, which is the Norwalk Historical Society's second largest fundraiser. And Dr. Costanza got here, so I guess we'll be doing that report after all. That's part of my report after all. So, but I do want to say that this has been my 4th year doing the event. Being able to support such a wonderful organization that does support the education of children through their Little Red Schoolhouse program is a joy. I have not gotten a chance to scare the mayor this year like I did last year. I'm hoping he'll come. I have seen family members. But in all seriousness, having a fellow board member with me has been a joy, and it's a really wonderful opportunity to get a few little spooky moments in during the Halloween season, as well as learn some history, as all of the spirits featured in the graveyard tour are actual people that lived and died in and around Norwalk. So with that, I will end my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lyons?
Nothing.
Sarah?
I have quite enjoyed being a ghost with you, Mr. Anderson. It's been really delightful, and I'm looking forward to doing it again this weekend. And also, I wanted to chime in on what Brian had said about the security guards. At West Rocks and Columbus, it's been a really positive improvement too. West Rocks in particular, the new entryway is beautiful. The double doors are beautiful. The security guards are very professional. It's a wonderful, much safer way to enter into the building, and it's making a big difference in how people feel about it. So.
Good.
Great. I also noted when I went to Tracy earlier at the end of last month that the security guard was in place, and I was delighted to see that we, were fully staffed, especially at an elementary school that didn't have a security guard at the end of last year. So I was also happy to see that the safety protocols were in place. The door was locked, the security guard was there, everyone was signing in. I was happy to see that. That said, my real reason for being there was not to check on the security guard, but to go to the Tracy Curious Cub Science Lab launch. And I was delighted to be there and have the opportunity to meet staff, students, as well as a number of parents, as the school was able to utilize the flexibility of their student-based budget to create a new science lab in the basement of their school, which had previously been filled with boxes upon boxes and reams of paper and old teacher supplies that were never going to be seen again. And so I applaud Principal Rangel as well as her staff and her entire community for utilizing, and their school governance council for utilizing their flexibility, finding the space, repurposing that space, and it is a beautiful, light-filled, energetic space that I look forward to seeing how it not only enhances science instruction in the lab, but how such one small piece, one room in a school could enhance science instruction across the day-to-day curriculum across the school. So it was a great day to be there. I really enjoyed my time.
Great. Mr. Mayor.
Well, first of all, if the statement by Mr. Anderson is true, that the spirits were actual people that lived and died there, I am not going to go. But a shout out to Rowayton School and a shout out to Silvermine School. This past week, Last week and this week, I attended their 2 walkathons, and Rowayton School raised a total of just over $44,000. And today I was pleased to note that Silvermine raised $43,000 plus. And that shows commitment of the parents and really a great school community. And the kids were all excited and enjoying themselves, and it was really great. So shout out to both those schools.
Great. Well, thank you for attending both those events. Ms. Keys, I know you just arrived, but would you like to give any kind of a committee report or a board member announcement report, especially since you just came from a meeting that I did give them a little update from what you sent me, but
good timing. Yes, Frank and I, hi Frank, just kind of made it at the same time. We're at one of the focus groups, the GPA, GPA/rank focus group at Norwalk High School. I think about 90 people attended, if I'm not mistaken, so it was really a great turnout of parents, lots of students, just interested community people that wanted to know what we were doing as far as our GPA and our ranking. So there was a slide presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. Dan Sullivan and Dawn were there, and I have to say Dan did an outstanding job tonight of really answering questions and kind of making, walking around the room. All of us did that, but I really think he was the focal point and really helped answer some questions. It was divided out. I think there were about 9 tables, if I'm not mistaken, or so, with about 9, 10 people in each table. And basically, they were asked what they thought of the policy. Basically, we had a subgroup that really worked on this with, separate from the policy committee and on what they wanted to work on with parents, teachers, and students. So in this PowerPoint presentation, they brought up some of their findings and what the focus group that came tonight, what their thoughts were and what they thought about it, some concerns and some questions that they had. So what we're going to do is Dawn, Frank, and Dan will kind of compile that information. They had small index cards as well as huge poster boards with some of their concerns, what they thought would work and what might not work. Compile that together and look at it and then have that be brought back to the policy committee before we formulate any type of policy. In addition to that, tomorrow night, we have the Brian McMahon focus group, which I believe right now, what we decided to do, if I could backtrack for a minute, we decided to RSVP so we had more of a clearer understanding of how many people were going to attend, how many facilitators we needed, to really make it more fluid for this focus group, and I think that really worked tonight. I'm hopeful that'll also work tomorrow night, and I believe Brenda will be facilitating tomorrow night. And then once we compile the information from Norwalk High School and Brian McMahon High School, we can work on how we will decide to craft the policy. But I think we had a great turnout of, again, it was great talking to some of the students and parents and any other interested party that really wanted to come tonight. One question that was brought up by a parent was, she felt it was great, we had a great turnout, but she felt it would have been more helpful if we had maybe, a flyer that maybe went home. So I know we try to be paperless, and I think we can all agree that's a great way to go, but I also think there's something to be said for a paper copy. So maybe moving forward with any other focus groups we might have in the future, I think having it on our website, Facebook posts, email, but also having a paper document, I think might be the way to go, looking at that future-wise.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to talk about on policy committee generally, Heidi?
That's not taking over, but that's a big chunk of our policy committee these days. We were thinking of having a special policy committee meeting on the 23rd. Speaking to Dan and Frank tonight, I'm not sure if we're going to have enough information to have that quick meeting on the 23rd. So we're going to talk about it. I'll mention it to the policy committee members on what date we'll have a special meeting, because I know we have election day coming up, and that's normally when we have our board meeting, first Tuesday of the month, and policy. So we won't have it that first Tuesday, but we're going to figure out a date that will work for everybody. And given Frank and Dawn and Dan's time, making sure that we do this justice as far as gathering all the information that we need.
Okay, well, thanks, Heidi.
You're welcome.
So that,
So we have the opportunity to finish the superintendent's report as the final item. And Frank, the board has received the rosters for this year's SGC participation. They've reviewed those. They're looking forward to the update.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
So we are into our third year of the SGC policy implementation. You might remember back in 2015, 2016, Brenda Williams, at that point, was the policy liaison and had formulated the new policy on SGCs, and the first implementation of that came in 2016, 2017. What we're going to talk about tonight is the 2017-2018 year in review, specifically the outside consultant, Greater Leadership Hartford, that puts this together once per year. They do an end-of-year assessment with all of the co-chairs at the June forum meeting that the board is invited to attend and generally attends. We'll look at the comparison of priority needs as set forth in that report. The second portion of this presentation will look at the current work of the SGCs. I've tried to pull a couple of just school examples of what they're working on specifically at their schools to give you a flavor of what that looks like. And then we'll wrap this up with some considerations for policy revision moving forward. So at the close of last year, the co-chairs participated in an end-of-year forum with the Board of Ed to review outcomes as per the policy. This included individuals rating their training experiences and setting preferences for future session topics. So last year, you probably remember that we decided to split the SGCs into feeder pattern and to hold training sessions for basically each side of town. So that worked well last year. There was a lot of training that went into last year. I think we had more than 10 SGC trainings, 10 evenings over the course of last year. We split them either at Brian McMahon High School or at Norwalk High School, and we had the schools in those feeder patterns attend so we could have conversations vertically across elementary, middle, and high. The trainings were again presented and performed by Rosario and Associates and Leadership Greater Hartford. We anticipate having fewer of the trainings this year. Part of that is a response that we've gotten from SGCs that we might have trained out last year. We may have had more trainings than were feasible for parents. So we're at this point scheduling just new member training. The first one's scheduled for November 7th. This is for any member who is serving in their first year of their first term on an SGC. That would happen on November 7th. In the 16-17 forum, we asked folks what they thought the next level of work was as it relates to training. And these were the three areas that the SGCs reported out were most necessary to receive training on: school budgeting, designing school improvement plans, and building school culture and wellness. And so the focus of the trainings last year were in one of these three areas. So we would run 2 school budget trainings, one for the Brian McMahon side and one for Norwalk High. We did the same thing with school improvement planning and also with school culture building and wellness. And if we take a look at the results of the need assessment analysis report, you will see here that this is almost like the Halloween version of PowerPoint.
It went to blue and then red and then disappeared.
So the board does have this in front of them, Frank.
Okay, so
you can just continue.
I'll keep moving. So assessment responses that they SGC co-chairs got back on included these areas of training: analyzing school achievement data, understanding the school budget process and guiding SGC members through the budget process, developing a school accountability plan that articulates the school's mission, and then lastly, engaging parent, teachers, and community members in the school vision, mission, and school accountability plan. Before I move ahead, I would say the area that we were least impressed by in terms of the positivity or the productivity of the meetings came in the school budget meetings. Those were very difficult meetings. Kristen Carsmith, Tom Hamilton, I believe Patty Foley may have been involved in some of those. We met at least on 2 occasions working with the SGCs on how they can best play a role in the adoption of their school-based budget. But there are some constraints, I think, that are hard for SGCs to understand. So we're bound in a lot of ways by our contracts and our union commitments in terms of personnel placement, et cetera. And so the policy calls for SGCs to have autonomy in developing and approving their budgets. And they do, but they do it within constraints, some being union constraints, others being constraints that are set forth in how large the budget is, what the budget allocation can be per school. So they can't make a recommendation for how much money they need, but they can make decisions about how best to allocate discretionary spending once their staffing decisions are made. This is an interesting piece, and in an effort to be fully transparent, you'll see here that the principals and the co-chairs are not always seeing eye to eye in the comparison of priority needs. So you will see where the percentages are similar. Those are examples of priority needs that both the co-chair and the principal value equally. The first example of that would be the 3rd bullet down, understanding the school budget process and guiding SGC members through the school budget process. You'll see there that the SGC co-chair and the principals that responded at the fall forum both agree that this is an important priority need for the SGC. You'll see that again with the next category, developing a school accountability plan that clearly articulates and supports the school's mission. Here, 80% of parents felt that this was a priority, whereas 50% of administrators did. So even a gap there, but not quite as exacerbated as you see in the highlighted yellow sections. The other section where there was congruence here was engaging parents, teachers, and other community members. Both the co-chairs and the principals believed this ought to be a priority of the SGC's training and working together. And you can see here the outlier gaps. Administrators responded that it is not a priority necessarily to understand the roles and responsibilities of council members in the same way that co-chairs scored this. Analyzing school achievement data and helping others understand it. You can see the difference there. And then what looks to be the largest gap is empowering parents to have a voice on the SGC. So some principals struggling with releasing that control, and that's part of that's really one of the spirits of the policy is making this a check and balance. The principal is still running the school, is still the CEO of the building, but they do have, another way of saying would be a board, so to speak, right? They're going to their board, they're getting guidance, and they're making decisions with that board. And principals are not used to that, and you can see that it's reflected here in the data.
Yeah, may I?
Some examples.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On this, I find interesting, if you were to take this information where there's these discrepancies, and you know the schools, do you see any parallels? A high-functioning school would have, our high-functioning schools would have different set of data for some of these questions that, let's say, our medium-functioning schools are schools with certain problems. Do you see consistencies?
That's a great question. I think that part of the answer is in how we define high performing. If we're talking about all of the factors that make up the school accountability index, then we would probably see principals that are struggling in some of the school accountability indicators, also struggling with their school governance councils. We may not, I don't think we see that where we see schools that are showing growth in most of those factors. So if we look at student achievement as just one dimension, but we think about the others, culture, the other ways that the state considers high performance, I think you would probably find some correlation between principals who are meeting and exceeding a lot of these performance areas in the school accountability index. Those same principals are having better success with their SGCs, consensus-driven decision-making, understanding that they're still in charge and responsible and are leading the school's community, but are embracing this SGC almost as a new challenge. This is a group that's committed to the school. They believe in the mission. They want to make this school better, and the principals that are effectively working through problems with the SGCs are aligning more closely with the co-chair responses. If you take a look at the current work of the SGCs, I just pulled a couple of examples. You can see.
Frank, before you go on that, I just one other topic I would just touch on, which I've heard now from a number of people, and I think it's just a function of the way it is, but I know there's been a really high level of frustration with a lot of these SGCs on the budgeting, that they feel like they're being given, and I think you kind of touched on this, but I just want to vocalize it from the outside, that, you know, you're giving them all this power, but they really realize they're kind of powerless. And you're right, it's, you know, at the margin deciding, and just like, you know, at Rowayton School, they were going to get a STEM coach, and then they couldn't find someone they liked, so then they decided to spend their money, you know, what they had on a certified media specialist. You know, so they did have some power, but I think probably we need to manage those expectations, or in these trainings, those expectations need to be managed, because I think they feel like they're being given all this power when in fact they really aren't.
I think this manifests itself in two primary areas. One is the assignment and selection of staff below the level of principal, right? So assistant principals, teachers, the whole transfer process, the assignment process, where we have to be able to make these assignments because we're bound by union contracts to affect them in a certain way. The other, though, which I think we saw more of last year as an area of frustration, was the reconciliation of the budget, where when you have to make reductions in the budget, you know, you've tried to make those discreetly in areas that are the furthest away from instruction, that would have the least impact on the school government, on student achievement. And I think, you know, if you're sitting on a school governance council, your thought is, we'd like to figure that out, right? And we may not have the same professional guidance or the same knowledge base as a member of a board of education. We might want to maintain more things that we're already used to, but we'd like to make that decision. The only antidote to that, which I think we should consider during this year's budget reconciliation process, is to make any reductions on a percentage basis across the board to the per student allocation. So in other words, let's say you have to make a reconciliation of a couple $1 million. You know, a certain percentage of the per student allocation, which of course varies by level, may be the way to approach this as a way that would be more acceptable to the SGCs, where they could then wrestle with it, and, you know, while having to make a difficult decision, could at least make the decision that they want to make. So, you know, we've given this a lot of thought since the meeting last June, the feedback meeting last June. That may be something you would want to consider this spring.
Dr. Adamowski?
Yeah.
Well, actually, Sarah had her hand up first, sorry.
Are there plans to be like self-reflective with this data? I assume you have it broken out by school.
We do.
And are there plans to have like a self-reflective part of the process where you'll sit down and say, hey, look, you administrator and you co-chair have really vastly different ideas of what this means to be working together?
Right, and some of that comes in the form of evaluation and goal-setting conferences, but there are also opportunities in school leaders meetings to talk with principals broadly about what we're proud of and what we need to work on.
But specifically in the schools where you have because I'm assuming that you have outliers and schools where these are closer together, that's a priority for okay.
Yes.
Okay, Bruce?
When using a percentage, if I remember correctly, some of the schools last June, when I was sitting at the different tables, I don't fully understand the allocation. I assume the allocation is by size, the overall allocation.
No, it's a per student allocation.
That's what I meant, per student, when I say
Yes.
size. And some of the smaller elementary schools were saying, basically, there's like a critical mass. And if you're a really one of our smaller elementary schools, they already, in their opinion, don't have enough to do the kinds of things that they would like to do, because just there's no floor. Okay, so if you go with a percentage basis, that might exacerbate that problem. They would be so far below the floor to do anything meaningful, they just would get more and more frustrated.
So there is a body of school districts in the country that follow student-based budgeting practices. It's pretty much accepted that at the elementary level, the minimum number of students to make this successful is 350. At the secondary level, the minimum is about 500. And that is because regardless of the size of the school, you still have to support the same level of overhead. A principal, a secretary, a custodian, and so on. And so we have been typically, we have done what is typical in that practice, and we have given small school supplements to WPIP at the elementary level. Previously, we did at Columbus as well, but now that Columbus is receiving magnet funding, that's no longer necessary. And we also have at Rhoton. So I think that will be the reality regardless of any percentage increase or decrease. But, I think the percentage decrease will obviously hurt everyone, but it hurts everyone equally and does allow the SGCs to make a specific decision. Heidi.
Frank, a question. I mean, for me, what's glaring, not only the empowering parents to have a voice on the SGC, the 19% from administrators and then parents 71, but something more that stands out is the understanding the roles and responsibilities, which we've all been kind of discussing. And I know the feedback from the co-chairs, really just having new member training, which I understand, and you don't want to have redundant training for existing school governance council members.
Mm-hmm.
But is there something or some way that we can work on really defining their roles as a school governance member? I think that's important. It's some kind of training that's going to really define and know their responsibilities. And I know from this report, it's from our co-chairs, which we had our meeting last year and the year before, but are we hearing their voices also? Are the co-chairs also speaking to all their members on the School Governance Council?
I would like to think that they are.
I know it's stating just co-chairs, but I'm
Right.
curious to know, as a body, as a School Governance Council, are we hearing all the members? And maybe the co-chair is their voice, but I'd be curious to know, some might disagree with this. This could be just strictly from the co-chairs. I'm just curious to know.
That's a good point. This is a small sample size of the total number of SGC members. This
Yeah.
doesn't incorporate the 5 teachers on each SGC, community members, and captures basically the lead parent.
Yeah, I feel that it should be from all the voices at the table in the school
So
governance
we could
department.
consider doing that this year, prior
Suggestion?
to your feedback session.
Yeah.
We survey them all, have the results available at the feedback session, where that could be a focus of discussion.
You might have
That's a good
differences in
suggestion.
opinions, but I think it's important to have
Yeah.
a voice for everyone.
Okay, so you think that is doable, Frank?
Sure.
Eric? Oh, sorry, it's quite a...
Brian.
Brian, jacket.
Thank you.
Jacket.
Remembered it when he got inside.
So I actually have 2 questions, and I apologize if the first one is redundant, if it was answered, or if it's in this packet, I couldn't find it. Is this 100% participation?
On the data results?
Yes.
There was one school that was not present at the forum.
Okay, and
So this
was there
is-
any action done to follow up with that school?
We did not incorporate their responses into the data. They weren't present, so it's not included. So I think there were 19 SGC chairs and there were 18 or so submissions.
Okay. I do need to jump ahead because I unfortunately do need to leave. I apologize. But I did have a number of concerns on the roster. There are a couple of situations, I can pick out one right now. West Rocks Middle School does not list a co-chair. That's just one. Another is Brookside. If we go to Brookside, you will see, and perhaps this is an easy explanation. I can now find Brookside. Of course, it was right with me, and now there it is. It shows Sandra Feo shows the administrator, and the co-chair is /community. Is that correct?
Hold on one second. Let me find Brookside.
In between Columbus and West Rocks, it shares a page with West Rocks.
Yeah, at Brookside, they and it's not the only school are struggling with finding community members.
No. So, the co-chair is listed as community.
Right. So this.
They don't have either. Is that the?
No, I believe that's the co-chair.
Yeah. So you will see this in the policy considerations when Dr. Costanzo gets to that. When your policy was developed, and you remember back when it was, Mr. Lyons was the primary author, I had input in it, it then went to the policy committee, worked on it further. There was so much thought that went into this, but you can't avoid having some not intended consequence, and the only way to deal with that is to get experience in the policy and then work those things out further. The original intent in the policy is that those community slots would be filled by representatives of community partners as opposed to community members. The way this has evolved, there have been parents who have been termed out on the SGC who are now reelected as a community member.
But they're still doing that within the 2-term limit.
They're still doing that.
So an example would be a parent that served 1 year of 1 term and then a 2-year term, and in the 2nd year of the 2nd term, they are filling a community member role because they are no longer a parent at the school.
But I do need to interject. How is it that a non-parent is a co-chair?
No, this person is a parent.
So they're community person.
Turned out as a parent.
But they were elected to a community position.
But if they are filling the role of a community member, that person should not be a co-chair.
They're not. They're one or the other. So that's listed with a backslash. I believe it's the co-chair, but they're not. We don't have any examples of them serving in both roles.
Okay. Another one example is in Fox Run. Wanda Chowdens is listed as the co-chair, and then he's also listed as a parent member. Is that a mistake? Does that mean there's an open position there?
Yes. In fact, at Fox Run, there were several individuals on the school governance council that did not return to their term. And so they had to hold an election after returning to school this year because there were several vacancies on the SGC.
Was there a reason given for that?
Yeah, people didn't return.
When you say didn't return, they didn't return as a member of the community?
No, they didn't.
The school community?
They didn't fulfill their responsibility of their term.
Okay.
Too many absences at meetings.
Okay.
3 or more, and they can be removed from the SGC.
Correct. Okay, and the other thing is this is a continuation from the last time we received these. I am still seeing a lot of overlap of people being a community member at one, and I did see that being something that's addressed in a potential policy change. But it's, a community member here, a parent there, sometimes parent on 2.
Yeah, there's nothing that precludes a parent. If they have 5 children in the system and they go to 5 different schools, they could be on 5 different SGCs, technically.
And I did find it interesting that part of the suggestions, and actually this was my final question to see where this was coming from, the policy consideration.
Should we skip ahead to that?
Yep.
I apologize.
No, I think
that's fine. I think this is
I think this would be good to do and
the heart of the
conclude with the examples you can read on your own, what each school is doing, so we should probably just conclude with the policy considerations now.
Yes. Specifically, where did it go? I apologize. Also, it didn't list Center for Global Studies having a co-chair. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, the Center for Global Studies has a set of bylaws that are unique to their SGC for their operating plan. So they end up doing more of what one of our SGCs would do. But technically, they only need to meet twice per year. I think I added a page.
As an inter-district magnet school, they are governed by their state-approved operating plan. That operating plan is very specific regarding representation from the participating districts. So
I've asked Julie to do her best to
that's
try
what
and
they have to follow.
meet the standards of our policy, and she really has done a great job.
That's really, I assume that may be the case, because I knew they kind of did fall into that separate category because of their distinction in the state. So I appreciate that she is, and I've watched Julie, at the last meeting that I was at, she was fantastic and very much engaged. The second bullet point under policy considerations I do find slightly comical to a degree. Since we did address that at length, at least a part of it, and this was part of what we were trying to address. So is this something that came up as a suggestion of parent members, community members? Where did these suggestions come from, the policy considerations?
These are the administration's recommendations for policy considerations to the board that we hope would be, and by the way, they're a product of board input as well over the past couple of years. We're certainly reflective of that, but these are the policy considerations that we would recommend that the policy committee consider when they get to this policy.
I appreciate that, and I'll end on this. It is slightly concerning to see that the administrators think that at 19% that their role is to give parents a voice. It's no wonder that we're still having some struggles getting people to attract to these school governance councils. I do hope and I do have faith that you will be able to address this. I know as we've had issues that have arisen and also celebrations that have arisen from the policy as well, you've been able to bring both of those to us and work on correction. And this is something that I do think could greatly hinder the success of this overall policy. And I do hope that it's something that can be nipped quite soon.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Sorry. That's reading the policy considerations. All right, Sarah, please proceed.
I know we're skipping over the examples, but I did just want to note as a possible suggestion that the two high school SGCs have very, really well-organized and run and thought-out SGCs, so much so compared to their middle school feeders in terms of just the examples that are given there, that it might make sense to have the middle school, maybe just the middle school co-chairs go to the high school SGC meetings.
That's a great idea.
Oh.
Or even create a mentorship relationship between the two chairs.
Sure. Because the difference between those paragraphs.
I think you also have,
striking.
Sarah, one thing is the high schools, I think, are both state mandated. And so have been in existence for a longer period of time. And so they've really developed, I think especially like at Brian McMahon, that, under Suzanne, that was really kind of cultivated.
Yeah.
And at Norwalk High School, I think you've had some activist parents, and they realized the power of the SGC, and so they've harnessed that, which is how so much of that renovation work in the end is taking place.
That's right, and it would be great to get that knowledge out to the middle schools so that they could.
For best practice,
Yeah, that's a strong
Heidi has her
example.
hand raised.
No, actually, no, I do, thank you. But Julie does, I think Julie was first.
Thank you.
After Julie, your friend.
Thank you very much.
Honest.
So one question is, when I'm looking at the term expirations, in theory, when I go back to the original policy language, the whole point was to have the
staggered.
have it staggered. And my concern is I'm not seeing a lot of staggering, not only with some of the parents, but also with teacher representatives.
Right. We've found it to be impossible to maintain the staggering over a period of years. So while the intention of the policy was you would split the first election 1 year, 2 year terms, the level of attrition just doesn't allow the policy to continue to move evenly over a period of years. So in the course of 3+ years, we've had parents come off, parents move, teachers decide that they don't want to fill out their term. And so there's really no way to maintain an equal turnover in the way that, like, you know, you see in the Senate, where a third of the Senate is up for re-election. It won't be as smooth and even as that.
Okay.
But we did spend, you know, several hours looking at these lists, and we asked principals a lot of follow-up questions, and that was one of them, where we saw a similar term expiration for a whole group, like teachers. We followed up and said, you know, you should have some teachers coming up 1 year sooner or going 1 year later. And the responses that we're getting are, you know, teachers were not finishing out the terms. We needed to hold an election for a vacancy, and all terms going forward were 2 years, so now they ended up on the same end year. So it's unfortunate that we can't be more scientific on this, but the reality is it just plays out differently than what we might have thought going into the policy design.
So with that said, I'm also seeing that it's more clear in some schools than others.
Right.
So that leads me to believe that there's something else going on there too, or exit interviews, or
really just what's the only thing that is really going on is the people that serve their 1 year terms serve their 1 year terms, and the people that serve their twos serve their twos. And so when the elections happened in that on year, we saw a replacement. People didn't drop off, and so we see the even distribution at some schools and not others. So that would not be an indication that that it isn't working well at some schools and not others. It disguises the fact that we do have people that just step off or are not allowed back because of their attendance or.
Right. So that said, I'm not seeing anything related in the policy considerations about trying to find some way of rectifying that staggered. You know, I understand all of the rationale that you're providing here. I'm concerned from a design standpoint that having so many members, more than 50%, clearly more than 50% in some cases, especially, almost 100% of the teacher positions end at 2020 is not a great place to be, especially when we're also looking at SGC members. If they like the work and build capacity related to some of this decision-making, could potentially become school board members and run for those school board positions as well. It's just concerning as it goes against the whole idea of the design.
One thing that we might want to consider in terms of alterations would be that if it is determined that the term expiration all happen to fall in the same year for a group, we can try and restart the 1 and 2 year cycle. But then there's a fairness question, because you have a group of teachers, say, who want to be on for 2 years, and half of them will be on for 1 year because the school has run itself into a situation where it's got an entirely new group of SGC members.
Although in theory, they could be on for 3 years, because it would be the 1 year first term, and then they could be reelected to a second term.
They could be on for 4 years if both terms are 2 years.
Correct. So equity, agreed, yet at the same time, it would potentially
be 3
or 4 years.
That's one possible solution, to have that election design, like the first election, available for a school that falls into a situation where it's got
more than X percentage of any position needs to be filled. Okay, thank you.
I think this will be an ongoing challenge with just school mobility and attrition and transience and attendance rates.
And especially if parents and community members and teachers don't necessarily feel like their voices are being heard or well utilized on the SGCs, that makes it more difficult to want to do it. Do they have a call-in policy as well? If someone can't come, can they call into a meeting, or you have to be in person?
You have to be present.
Yep.
I mean, I'm thinking of our policy of,
Right.
you know,
That's also
calling.
something that
Yeah.
we may want to think about, if that is an issue, if attendance is an issue, because you're
True,
parents
but-
and you have kids and other commitments.
But I agree, I mean, point well taken, but I'm also thinking for something like this, I think the meetings are they once a month, if I'm not mistaken?
Some meet more than that, but
More, I think many, I know the high school one, I'm pretty sure meet once a month, I mean, that's potential consideration, but if I could just add on, Mike?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're already there.
Thank you. As I'm thinking, you know, during this GPA ranking, 'cause Frank, as we were seeing a lot of the students, I was actually talking to some of the students as they were leaving, there were a lot of ninth grade students. And as I'm looking at the school governance policy and and we've always decided as a policy we would tweak it and get feedback from the chairs, and hopefully now we'll get feedback from all the school governance council members. But we decided to have 2 students at the high school level, which I think was important to have a voice, have our students have a voice. But I'm thinking at our middle school, we might want to consider having 1 or 2 students being part of that. You know, especially if we're having issues or concerns with some that can't fulfill, you know, some parents maybe perhaps that can't fulfill their obligation, maybe having a student voice, maybe starting out with 1 and then potentially adding 2. But I think that might be worthwhile for us as a policy committee to kind of look at that and maybe add that in.
We can document.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
We do, you're going to hear a lot about dress code.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, if not, then we do need to approve the minutes. So that's what we'll conclude our discussion on
Okay,
SGC.
thank you.
And we have 3 sets of minutes to approve. The September 4th minutes.
No.
I don't know if everyone's had a chance to review them. Could I have a motion? Ms. Keys, seconded by Ms. Meyer Mitchell. Any discussion or corrections for September 4th? No corrections, all in favor? Unanimous? That's 8 votes, as Mr. Meek had to depart.
And
Seven.
Mr. Anderson
Seven.
also left.
Oh, Mr.
Eric
Anderson,
left,
sorry. Sorry, I didn't see him leave, I saw Eric leave. On the September 25th minutes, could I have a motion to approve? Mr. Lyons, Ms. Corbett, seconding. Any corrections? No corrections, all in favor? Unanimous, all 7 of us here. And last of all, October 2nd meeting, could I have a motion? Ms. Lemieux, seconded by Ms. Corbett. Any corrections? No corrections, all in favor?
I have to abstain.
Okay, abstention by Ms. Meyer Mitchell. And I think that.
To adjourn?
Yes. All in favor, yes. Let's go. We are done at 8:40. Thank you.
Oh, my God.
Rich. Yeah.
Just have to read this one. I have to read this. Can't wait.
I don't see it for the wedding.
Yeah. Well, next time we'll see you.